In this first episode, I had the chance to talk with Pia Lauritzen. She is a philosopher, writer, and keynote speaker, a huge educator on the question of how do you ask questions actually, and what questions says about us, and how to ask good questions, and how culture and technology is related and connected to these questions. So it was essential to me to start this podcast by discussing the impact of AI on critical thinking and relating this to how we ask questions and discover the world through questions. Can AI help us to do this, or is it not possible? This is basically the discussion we had with Pia. And after this discussion that I just finished now, I feel that I've learned a lot, but also that now, instead of paying only attention about the answers, I'm now way more careful about how I will ask questions and listen to questions and give more importance to these in the future. Good morning, Pia. It's really a great pleasure to have you. I was really looking forward to starting and kicking off this podcast with you, actually. So, as we discussed, let's jump right in. So, we have seen, or at least I have seen many times on social media and colleagues who shared a science paper who showed that large language models, these generative AI models like ChatGPT, can help to reduce belief in conspiracies theories. And with a significant effect is after chatting with these tools that were made to help people change their belief, it basically reduced by 20%. And after 3 months, the effect was still there. But the really hot question that directly came to my mind when I read this and that I was asking to everyone was, but could it be equally efficient to support conspiracy theories and basically to push the opinion of people in different directions? What do you think about this?
I would really like us to pay attention to the problem we're trying to solve and be very specific on, is it to, I think you use the words, make people change their beliefs or make people change their minds. And I think that's not, probably not the way we want to go about it. Because the problem with people believing in things that are not true cannot be fixed by telling them the truth or by convincing them or by changing their mind, because they will just, next time they come across something they think sounds reasonable, they will believe in that. So we need to go to the root of this, and that is that basically we are having troubles thinking for ourselves. We are having troubles being critical, asking questions of, does this sound right? Why does it sound right? What are the implications of this? If I believe this, then what do I miss? Where do I risk going wrong somehow? If we don't ask ourselves these questions, then we are constantly at risk of believing something that's not true. So I think we need to address that rather than and ask the question: can AI help with that? Can AI help with nurturing our critical thinking skills? Because if it cannot, then everything it can do kind of loses its point in terms of thinking, at least.
You said we have difficulties to ask these good questions. I guess when you say we, it's really in general. And why? Why do you think do we struggle? What is it more just knowledge? Is it our personal cognitive bias, or even just like confirmation bias? Because maybe we don't want to be challenged, we just want to hear and reinforce our prior beliefs. Or what do you think will be the different causes or
Yeah,
reasons?
so I'm a philosopher, not a psychologist. So I would always go for the basic human features rather than the personal psychological traits or and I'm also a bit of conscious about the term bias, because that's also a psychological term, and it's culturally defined. What I'm interested in is these basic human, you can call it existential anxiety. Actually, it's about knowing that we don't know. It's being born into this world with this consciousness of of not knowing everything and needing to learn and needing to ask these questions in order to grow. Um, and then a lot of societies have built in educational systems, work systems in organizations that kind of it tells us to do the opposite. It tells us to know. It tells us to have the answers. We are being supported, and even we receive a lot of promotions and honor if we know the answers. If we just ask a lot of questions, we don't. So it's a combination of this existential consciousness of knowing that we don't know, and then a lot of structures and systems and society and organizations, and now technology that tells us that the important thing is to know. That's why AI is designed to give us answers. It's designed to always come up with something. No matter what, it will come up with something. And I think that's all part of the environment that we are being humans in that makes it difficult.
Yeah, so while you were speaking, I was exactly thinking about this, about how LLMs echoes actually our behavior. And when I mean our, we know that they are representative, mostly these LLMs of one part of the population, right? What that we sometimes called weird, so Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. But also, I would like to share this because I had this discussion quite a bit. And basically, the one reason why I love statistics is basically it's the you never know something for sure in statistics. You evaluate the risk of being right or wrong. And I think personally that doing statistics and learning statistics helps to deal with uncertainty. And basically, it helps you to be okay with uncertainty, but also evaluate the level of uncertainty. So then you can be a bit more humble also when you talk, because there are very few things that we know for sure, right? And just saying, well, it might increase the probability, it might increase the risk. It seems that there is some evidence. Just this language, I feel that is often way more adequate. While indeed we see it in politics, we see it with LLMs, you tend to have the use of words, a level of certainty that is a bit too heroic, let's say. But one thing that I really like is, and maybe let's go also in this direction before coming back to the first question, because you work a lot on culture, language, and philosophy, and I think it's interesting to notice that also based on what you said, that LLMs also reflect basically because they are trained to please us, reflect basically what we like. And here you mentioned that it seems that we also want we always want an answer. That's something that we often, on average, at least favor, and with some level of certainty. So do you see also other things that are basically reflect the way we think, we ask questions, and we expect answers when we play with these tools?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I agree that it reflects what we want and how we do things. When the things I mentioned before are all the things that makes it difficult for us to think for ourselves. But we know how to do that. We know how to ask questions, and we know how to think. But we're just constantly surrounded by different technologies and structures promoting the opposite, promoting the answers and promoting the easy way out. And I think that's also why I mentioned the difference between psychology and philosophy. I think that's part of the explanation is that psychology has really reached a widespread uh, acknowledgement. Every part of society, you use psychologists to understand, to explain, to express how human beings work. And even, for instance, the story about humans having a lazy brain, we just want the easy way out. We're not fit for this world, for this digital age. We were built to navigate nature and run away from dangerous animals and stuff like that. These kind of stories is preventing us. They are preventing us from connecting with our basic curiosity, our basic doubt and skepticism and wonder, all these basic things that every child is defined by these things. And we were all children, right? So we were born to do these things, to think and to ask questions. And AI is not designed to reflect that. Quite the opposite, right? Contrarily, if you read the paper, Alan Turing's paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence from 1950, that kicked off a lot of the basic things about AI and described how this child machine, as he called it, how it should be designed and how it should be raised in order to reach something that could be compared with human intelligence. If you read that paper, it's very, very obvious that AI was designed to provide answers. And not only to provide answers, but to provide answers that no matter whether the machine knew anything about it or not, it would come off as convincing. It would be convincing. It would be answers that would make human questioners, interrogators, believe whatever the answer was. And that is indeed a problem, right? Because that means that we're not only surrounded by structures and technologies and education systems and all these things promoting this behavior of not questioning and not thinking. We are also constantly being fed with answers that make us believe that we're on track. We know this. We've got this. We can know this. And then we're left, each and every one of us are left with this feeling of, but I still miss something. There's still something missing. Is it me there's something wrong with? Am I doing this wrong? How come I'm not satisfied? I can get all these answers. I'm doing everything right. How come something feels wrong? That's not the state we want ourselves and each other to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. No, I see exactly how this actually, when I said that it might reflect the way we prefer things, it might actually intensify our weaknesses in that sense. We might want answer, even if it's because it's hard sometimes maybe to ask the good questions. And I'm wondering, I think, again, it's so dear to my heart, these questions. I mean, I shared with you and my audience know it. I'm working on causality, which is basically asking why. And often I say this, I say I'm just remained at the stage of a child, asking why for everything and asking why 20 times for the same questions to go deeper and deeper. And I think that indeed this behavior is something that can lead to beautiful discovery. Again, being a bit more humble about our knowledge. But what do you think about these LLMs? Could they be also the answers? I mean, we know that when we ask a question, we ask a prompt. You often you have the prompt that is changed by the system, and actually we could imagine that it could help to frame better questions. Oh.
No. Yeah, I know this is not what it's not what people want to hear, and it's not what people necessarily experience, because people experience when interacting with the chatbot or interacting with some kind of AI, they experience that they have this intuitive sense of developing their way of thinking and getting great input. And you can ask ChatGPT to ask you question, and it will come up with critical questions that you haven't thought of yourself. And you're thinking, well, that's great. Now I'm really expanding my way of thinking because I'm being asked these questions that I wouldn't think of myself. Now I can start asking them too, and that, so it helped me. I get that that's the experience, but we really need, again, to stay focused and to understand what it is that it's basically designed to do. And Alan Turing writes it extremely clear. There's nothing there. Actually, there's no doubt about what it is AI is designed to do. It's designed to deceive. That's not his words, but the way he describes the imitation game, that's exactly what it is. One thing and one thing only: to deceive human beings into thinking that the AI, sorry, knows things, can do things, and actually is a thing that it cannot do and is not. It's very very simple. And to connect it with your question, we can tell the AI to ask us questions, but the thing is, it does it the same way it provide answers, which is convincingly. It's asking questions as if it knows how to ask good questions. The whole point with human beings asking questions is that we don't. When we ask a question, it's because it's something we don't know. We're not even sure, at least when we ask good questions, we're not even sure how to frame the question. We're trying. We are softly playing around and trying to navigate and, oh, could this be the way to approach this? Would this be a way of addressing that there's something here that I need to get a better hold of? So the whole idea is that for a human being, the difference between knowing and not knowing is huge. It's like two different ways of being in the world. When I know something, I'm convincing, I'm standing strong, I want everybody else to understand what I know because I have the data and I have the science to back me and I have all these things. When I don't know, I come off as a completely different person. I'm being humble. I'm being curious. I'm being maybe a little bit afraid of coming off as ignorant. I'm showing a whole other side to myself. And AI only has one. It only has one way of being, so to speak. And that is the I know how to do this being. And I know how to do it convincingly. So you will believe that I know what I'm doing. Um, and and that's why I'm saying no, because if we engage with AI when we want to develop our thinking, instead of engaging with each other, we are not being reflected in our humble, curious, explorative, learning ping mode. We are being reflected in the other mode, and that's the opposite of thinking. That's the opposite of evolving, basically.
So so many follow-up questions. The first, thanks a lot so the first you said it's made basically back to the framing by Alan Turing to deceive us. And this made me actually reflect on the whole debate about even its name, artificial intelligence. But is it intelligence? And I think that's just the relationship between deceiving and even the name being potentially misleading is interesting. The second thing I was just um, curious when you say AI, because it's very vast, right? It's a vast, varied world. Uh, do you here refer mainly to generative AI like large language models, or would you also include other type of models like just prediction that we could use for medical imaging to predict tumors or things like this?
I mean everything.
Okay.
That's why I talk about AI. I'm not an AI expert. It's not like I know how to develop AI. It's not like but by reading Alan Turing's paper very thoroughly, um, it's very clear that what he wants to do is build what he calls intelligent machines. And he even makes he starts his paper by writing, I propose we consider the question, can machines think? And as a philosopher, of course, I was intrigued. That's a nice question. But then you read, you only have to read a page or two. Then he refuses to deal with this question. He explicitly says, I don't want to discuss this question about whether machines can think, because I consider it too meaningless to deserve discussion. That's what he's saying. And then he introduces the imitation game, which is what we now know as the Turing test. And you can hear it in the wording of the imitation game, right? The machine should imitate. And it should not only imitate, no, it should imitate the player in the imitation game that is already imitating. That is, he has three players in the imitation game. One is player A, whose job is to come up with answers to anything. It's a man whose job is to pretend he's a woman. So although he doesn't know anything about being a woman, because he's a man, his job is to pretend that he knows everything. No matter what he's asked, he's going to answer as if he was a woman. Player B is a woman, and her job is to be a woman and to answer all the questions true to her nature, so to speak. And player C is the interrogator. So that's the player asking all the questions, not being able to see player A and player B, asking questions in order to determine who's who. And that's the game. And then what Turing is saying, what would happen if we replaced player A with a machine? Can we design a machine that would be as good as playing this part as a man would? So he is designing a machine to imitate the human being that is already imitating. So rightly, he doesn't want to talk about thinking. Because that's not the job. The job is to imitate and to be so good at that it convinces all the interrogators and all the humans that it is actually something that it is not, that it knows some things that it doesn't know, and that it can do things that it cannot do. So this is the basic of understanding. And what he then does is he says, obviously, this is not thinking. We shouldn't even discuss that. That's too meaningless. But he adds, his guess is that within a few decades, things will have evolved so much that we will be talking about these machines as intelligent or as thinking without expecting being contradicted. And that's exactly what has happened. Today, we talk about AI and we talk about it as intelligent and we talk about it as if it is thinking and all these things. That Turing in 1950, when he laid the groundwork for all of this, he said, of course, that's not the question. It's too meaningless to even discuss that. So let's put that on hold and let's build a machine that is very, very good at imitating. Mm-hmm. So good that it will deceive us into believing that it can think. That's a whole job. And what I find interesting, of course, coming from a philosophical perspective, is he never even considers building a machine that can replace player B and player C. It's not an option. So when we talk about today that AI can replace us in every aspect, every part of our human endeavor, is like, no, of course not. It was only designed to replace player A, player B, and player C. That's a human job. That is telling the truth and helping each other try to know, telling the truth after, the best of our ability, and helping each other do the same by sharing what we know and what we believe in and our values. And player C, keep asking these questions, being critical, doubting and saying, does that sound right? Could it be different? And what are the other alternatives? So these are the roles for the human beings that AI will never be able to replace.
So to be the interrogator and to think, really.
Yeah, and to really strive for whatever we think we know, to strive for knowing it even better, or learning, or even being wrong, accepting the fact that no matter what happens, something can things can happen that will prove us wrong, and we need to be open for that.
So related to the questions, and asking questions, do you know perplexity.ai?
No.
Okay, perplexity.ai is basically based on LLMs. The goal is to kind of replace the way we search for data. And instead of having like a search engine, like Google, it's an answer engine. So basically why I'm bringing this up, but it will be interesting once you have the opportunity to play a bit with it. I will be very curious to get your opinion on this. Basically, you ask a question and you get an answer based on what kind of information was found on the web with some kind of citation, I mean, reference to the website. But why I was bringing this, there is nothing new or special here. The whole potential magic, I'm not convinced yet, but I think what is interesting is that perplexity.ai, once you ask your first question and get some answers, you have a list of follow-up questions. Because basically, in an interview with the CEO, he exactly says this, like it's an invitation to go deeper. Usually you'll start with surface level questions just to clarify something. It could be the semantic, the terminology, it could be some technical things, but usually that's not the whole question. It's about the deeper impact and seeking deeper question, deeper knowledge. So I was just curious if you had the opportunity, but maybe you'll chat it further. But just conceptually, what do you think about this angle of using LLMs to actually encourage reflection and deeper quest of answers?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit related to what we talked about before, in terms of AI providing questions and prompts to reflect from the same from the same way of being as when it provides answers. So I think I can totally understand the urge in saying that would be so interesting to have an AI help me consider some of the questions and reflect on some of these things that might be blind spots to me. And I can see situations where it might be very useful. The thing is that human beings and human thinking, we don't evolve by being told what to ask, by giving examples of good questions to ask or good ways of approaching something. That's not how we grow. We grow by staying in this open, unknown space long enough for us to feel what calls for thinking, as the German philosopher Heidegger would say. So actually, for us to think and evolve, we need to stay in a completely in this void between knowing and not knowing, and that's empty. And that's back to the existential anxiety. That's this consciousness of there might not be a good question. There might not be a good next step. I need to take it anyway. So
Mhm.
chances are I'm probably gonna blow this up, and I'm gonna stay with that feeling long enough to see the next step. If I'm constantly being fed with AI generated input to reflection for reflection, or to make me think other questions, ask other questions, or think differently, then I'm not staying in that open space. It's kind of the opposite, right? I'm being overwhelmed, which is preventing me from listening um, to my own thinking, to my own nature, to the connection I have with other human beings, with the puppy I mentioned before, with nature. It prevents me from connecting with something else. Um, so that's why I'm so not into these things. I understand the drive. I understand the drive to build all this technology because, oh, so you're saying we're just supposed to ask more questions. I can build a machine that can help you do that. And I'm saying, no, you can't, because that's not the kind of questions I'm talking about. I'm talking about the questions that only I can ask from the place where I am connecting with my surroundings. And you cannot help me with that machine because you are not in a specific position. You don't have the limitations I do. I have to choose each and every moment. Where do I focus? Where do I use my energy? The machine does not, because it doesn't have a body. It doesn't have these conditions that we do as human beings. And it's facing and living up to and owning and taking responsibility for these limitations. That's what it means to ask good questions and to reflect and to think and to be a human. And the machine has no chance of doing that.
So a colleague of mine shared an example that reflects also the first part of your answer. He basically was teaching a class for a long time where basically they discuss research papers and different things. And suddenly this year, he realized that nobody was discussing in the class. They were all asking their questions to ChatGPT. And basically, before there was this kind of noise, but people turning to each other, what do you think about this? Helping them to frame different questions, to interact as humans, to just explore the thing differently. And I think this was indeed very sad to hear, and how you turn to something that will pretend to have answers indeed. And the biggest thing, also related to a follow-up podcast that is scheduled, is also sometimes it kills this diversity of opinion, this richness. You say A or B, but basically this is one machine in the end. And even if you have some randomness, it still have kind of one main way of, it's one machine basically. And I think this killing the diversity in the answers is really problematic indeed in our quest to grow and explore the world. But so you wrote, if I'm not mistaken, AI won't kill critical thinking. So first, are there people that are scared about killing critical thinking? Where does this first part come from? Because then you talk about opinion, right? This is the real issue that you already explored here. But could you just yeah, summarize or present what was your thought with this basically title?
Yeah, with AI is not killing critical
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah, the
Yeah,
first part, and then it's rather our opinion. But let's start with the first
yeah,
part.
yeah,
Why? So basically, do you think people are scared of this? Why and why it won't?
yeah. I think people are scared of it because they realize that something is at stake here. There's so that engaging with AI has an impact on how we think and behave, and also act and interact with each other. Um, and we've been, ever since ChatGPT kind of entered the world, we've been talking about all the things that AI might kill or might replace or might take over, right? So I think that that's part of the same discussion.
Mhm.
The reason it won't is because critical thinking is a it's a it's a human feature that, as we talked about earlier, that we were born into this world knowing that we don't know, and we can, in a millisecond, we can reconnect with that feature. Every time I do a keynote, or at least a lot of the times I do keynotes, I start out by inviting people to write down a question. So I haven't said anything yet. It's not like the traditional Q&A at the end of a keynote. It's very top front of the. Before I say anything, I ask people to write down a question. And in the beginning, they kind of they look away and they look like, oh, this is a tough one. How do I ask a question? And I don't know what to ask. I don't have. And then I say, just take a second. It's totally fine. Of course, you have questions. You wouldn't have joined me today if it was not because there was something you were hoping to learn or to explore. So just take a moment, and it takes less than a minute. Then people write down a question. So that's just telling me that we can, whenever we make the choice to do so, we can reconnect with the core of critical thinking, which is to ask. We can do that, and the second we do that, amazing things happens, because when we ask a question, we automatically activate our ability to consider what we think is important right now. So when I write down a question, I I choose where to focus. I could ask trillions of questions, but I choose to ask this one that's saying something about my perspective right now, what I think is interesting. It's also automatically, it activates our ability to connect with each other. By asking this question, I'm kind of inviting other people to look at this topic with me. And finally, we activate our ability to commit to a shared purpose. If I actually do ask my question to you, as you mentioned before, when people talking in a classroom or talking to each other, if I actually do ask my question to you, you will direct your attention at the same thing I'm looking at, which means that right now you and I are looking at the same thing at the same time, which is extremely strong, this commitment to a shared purpose. That's something humans know how to do. We've been doing it forever, and we will be doing it forever. And there's no chance that there's no technology that can kill that. The only thing that can kill that is if we don't keep it alive, if we don't keep practicing it, if we don't keep connecting with each other around these questions and this ability to think. So AI it's a completely different game. It has nothing to do with this ability to think. That's a human thing.
Mhm. So one thing, as you spend so many years thinking about how to ask powerful questions, good questions, and just ask questions in general to explore the world through questions, what will be your advice? Because that's one of the back to the class example and something that I experienced in a seminar as a young scholar. I always wanted to ask a lot of questions. I had tons in my mind, but I would take time to frame it. I was scared that people would think that that's a stupid question to ask. And sometimes people will make you feel that way, which is most of the time clearly out of the place. But here, basically, I feel that's where this AI is also a problem, is that basically you don't have this fear. You can just ask these questions and it's very accessible, cheap, and you don't have this social potential pressure. So what are, based on your experience or usually your recommendation to tune down or escape this fear of asking questions?
So I've built a few technologies myself. I don't program, but designed and invented ways of using technology to support groups of people. Again, as a philosopher, I'm not that focused on individuals. I'm focused on groups, cultures, humanity at large. So what I'm curious about is how can we rebuild some of these structures, as I mentioned before, some of these structures promoting the answers, promoting the knowledge and the expert, and making it difficult for 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 people like you, as you mentioned when you were younger. And I think we all know that feeling of refraining from ask a question because we're afraid that we will appear ignorant or we will offend someone, or we have all kinds of reasons uh, for for not asking questions. So what I found out was that if I can build technology that can help leaders, project leads, educators, teachers, when they have a group of people together, instead of saying to this group of people, ask me a question, now you can ask questions. And then this pressure turns on, and everyone is like, I'm not going to be the one raising my hand. Everybody, I have all these social dynamics at stake. It's not only the teacher thinking I'm stupid. It's my best friend. I can't afford that. I need to stay cool, right? So all these things going on. That instead of doing that, you can use this tool called Question Jam, which is a free digital tool that we invented, my co-founder and I. That is used by teachers across the world to invite students to ask each other questions anonymously in a 7-minute game. So on the phone, they can ask each other question. I can say, okay, maybe the topic is Queen Elizabeth. We just heard about her, and now we need to figure out what are we curious about, where do we want to go with this. And I ask you a question: why is she so important for this part of history that I need to hear all these things about her? So I ask you a question and you respond, and then you ask a new question. So for 7 minutes, students are exchanging questions and answers. And then this word cloud comes up and they can, click the questions and answers and explore questions and answers without it being, oh, this was Quentin's question.
Mm.
He's probably ignorant. Or this was Pia
Mhm.
trying to come off as if she knows something that she doesn't. Now it's about the questions and the answers and engaging in a conversation about the two of them, facilitating these dialogues. And I think that's probably an important step to help people in charge, so to speak, to create these open spaces for all of us to feel more safe. Because it's difficult to do on an individual level. It's difficult to be the one who says, I don't care. I just gonna ask all these questions because it is there's the existential anxiety, but there's also the social cost
Mhm.
of being the one who is the odd one out. No one wants to be that. Yeah, I think we need to help each other build these spaces.
And when the technology is not available, do you still have a a
Yeah,
recommendation?
but
Because
yeah,
yeah.
because you can do the same without technology. This is just a very structured way of doing it, but you can always make the choice to say, I'm sitting with my family, or I'm talking to my friend, or now I make the choice to be the one who doesn't know everything, who does know best. I will be launching a new LinkedIn learning course
Mhm.
in 2 weeks, and the very first sentence I say in that course is, "You don't need to know best. You can be the one who knows the least and learns the most."
Mhm.
And that's a sentence that I say to myself. That's an individual voice that we can all have in our mind when talking to other people. We can just say to ourselves, I actually don't need to know best.
Mhm.
In fact, if I don't, I will probably be the one who learns the most.
Mhm.
And I will be able to stay calm in this conversation because I don't have a position of knowledge that I need to defend. So I don't have to fight. I don't have to
Mhm.
struggle because I'm not sure if I know best. So now I'm just going to explore. I'm just trying to create this open space between us where something can happen that none of us know yet.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a task because that's a reality we live in
Mhm.
um, now and in the future.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've also witnessed a lot in debates is how sometimes we are attached in a potentially egoistic way, I'm not sure, to our ideas or our opinions, or the things we want to pretend that we know. And I mean, you see often the debate like someone is clearly wrong, but really struggle to admit it, as if it will diminish them as a person, while it should be clearly the opposite. I mean, when I debate with someone and at some point someone, or even listen to a debate and someone say, oh, I don't know this, or, oh, you might be right, actually, that's very interesting. Personally, the person, my opinion, my perception of their, how smart they are, how much they know is usually going up rather than down. Because to accept your limitation, to see beyond the first impression is usually rather a good sign of knowledge. And yeah, it should be more
Yeah, or
please.
it it's wisdom, right? It's the next level of knowledge, right? It's when you embrace, as you talked about, when you embrace the fact that you don't know. That's very wise, and most people like to be around people who are good at that, who are because it kind of it shows that you're comfortable being in this life with all its ups and downs and knowns and unknowns, and that's just very I feel exactly the same way as you described. Being around people who are like that, it just makes me feel comfortable, and I can trust that I can share my insecurities as well because he did. So now I can be a little more brave too. And I think that's what we want to. That's what we want to help each other do, rather than sitting behind each. We each have our own screen, talking to AI who pretends that it knows things that it is designed not to know. It's designed to make us think that it knows, right?
Mhm. And do you think we evolved in this direction? It seems that many people will try exactly as we started the conversation to give answer to pretend they know. Why is that? Just because maybe to lead your pack a long time ago, you need to pretend you know, and people you lead, or I don't know.
Um, I think we're a bit confused because comparing to back then when leading the pack, what made the difference in whether you gained followers or not was not whether you knew or didn't know. It was whether you were capable of doing
Mhm.
what needed to be done, right? So if you are capable of building, hunting down the animal that would feed me, or building the society that makes me feel safe, and make the decisions that I think these are the basic drivers in whether or not we follow someone. But living in what we call a knowledge or even post knowledge society, it has become more about what do you know and what don't you know, and that can be a problem because knowing doesn't equal being able to navigate, being able to doing. Um, so I think that, and I think we all know this, or we all experience this. We we have this on a deeper level. We have a sense of this, that we choose our leaders for different purposes than what they know. But we need to some kind reconnect with, or basically just create the space and the silence where we can listen to these insights, listen to this wisdom, because it's coming from within. So if we're constantly overshadowed with noise, we make it difficult for us to hear
Mhm.
ourselves think. Every time we take a moment to do that, I think that's why we see yoga and mindfulness and all these things. It's because we all of us know that the big wisdom, not the knowledge, but the wisdom comes from listening to the voice that comes from within.
Mhm. Mhm. And back to basically the one of your articles, so is how to basically, I'm not sure the title, but it was about critical thinking in the age of AI, and you give three advice, no, or something like this. Would you like to share it also here?
Yes, of course. Um, so it was based out of on this study showing that analytical thinking and creative thinking and are all things that employers say that they really look for in employees. Um, and I see this focus on analytical, critical, creative, all kinds of thinking. There's a lot of talk about that, a lot of debate about that. And I think what we need to do, the first tip, so to speak, is to not focus as much on the critical, creative, or analytical as focusing on the thinking part. Because the first mistake we kind of make is that we think that we are all thinking. We think that that's something we just do automatically. And it's not. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger even said that science is not thinking. And he said that the most thought provoking thing in the time we live in, and that was in the 1950s, it has only gotten worse. But the most thought provoking thing is that we are still not thinking. And what he meant is that that instead of focusing on what calls on us to think and what calls for thinking. And that means, and that's back to the listening to whatever is important, to the most important thing that needs to be thought right now. Then we run around focusing on everything we think is interesting. So today it's interesting to talk about this. Tomorrow it's interesting to think about this, and we use this interesting as the thing that guides us. And Heidegger says that's a bad strategy because interesting is it's constantly fleeting. It's changing all the time.
Mhm.
Whereas what calls for thinking is the things that it's the long term impact. You were talking about impact. So so what are the things that we need to take care of on a long term basis, so we don't get flooded by all these interesting things, and we spend one day, 2 day, a week, a year and suddenly we die. That's the thing about human beings, right? In contrast to AI, we are actually going to die, and I don't know if it's going to be tomorrow. I hope not, or if it's going to be in 2 years or in 50 years. And so I think this is very important to distinguish between saying, oh, right now we're talking about critical, now we're talking about analytical, now we're talking about creative, now we no, just focus on the thinking part, which has to do with the long term focus. So that's the first tip, so to speak. And it's connected with the second one that has to do on the focus on what there is to think about. So that was actually both one and two. And then the final one is making this distinction. We've been talking about it as well between do I need something to think with, or do I need someone in order to think? So that's the basic argument we've been talking about as well, that in order to think, I need to do it with someone who is like me, who has the same problem of not knowing. Um, that's not a problem to AI, it doesn't know that it doesn't know. So it doesn't have that problem. Human beings, we are thinking because we're faced with this problem of knowing there's something we don't know. We actually face this, sorry, we're faced with this gap between what we know and what we don't know. And that gap is an invitation that I need another human being in order to bridge. Otherwise, I will just stay. Either I will stay on my side with an opinion, or I will feel lost, get lost in the gap. But with another human being, I have the chance of bridging it.
Mhm. And so thank you very, very much for sharing this advice. And also something that I'm really actually clueless. And it's not to reinforce what we just mentioned, but really something that I'm clueless. I'm very curious. It's because I see in this also in your bio, and what we discuss here is your knowledge also about the impact of culture or relationship with culture. And again, just because we mentioned this very quickly, these tools tends to reflect one type of thinking, and it might be a risk that it starts spreading more and more this type of thinking in the world, because we interact it voluntarily, like we go on ChatGPT, but also more and more we don't interact with these tools voluntarily. Like it's a chatbot, we have to ask a question to our insurance, and we will interact with these tools. We read LinkedIn posts that have been generated and articles completely with these tools. So basically, we're more and more exposed with this way of thinking. So how does culture, in your experience, plays a role in how we ask questions, and yeah, mostly as we ask questions?
Yeah. So there are my studies of cultural differences in how we understand and use questions show that there are basically three ways, and they correspond to the thing I mentioned before about our ability. When we ask a question, we activate our ability to consider our own position,
Mhm.
to connect with each other, and to commit to a shared purpose. So I call it the magical question triangle, because these three things are actually, when we ask a question from the place of not knowing, of truly wanting to learn, then we activate this magical question triangle. And what my research of different language cultures showed was that we have three very different ways of understanding and using questions. In some cultures, we use questions to draw attention to our own perspective. So, for instance, I observed school classes, a Chinese, a Danish, and a Russian school class, in order to see how we educate our children to understand and use questions. And in the Chinese school class, it was very obvious that the teacher was asking questions to let the student know that now the job was to answer the thing she needed to hear. So it was asking a question as a test, so to speak, right? It was not to hear what is on your mind. It was asking a question to test if the student knew the right answer. So, and the reason, the way I could see that in my observational studies because I don't understand Chinese, was that every time the Chinese teacher asked the question, every student looked at her, expecting her to know the right answer. And they were not looking at the student, they were not looking at the subject matter of the question, they were looking at the teacher. Whereas in the Danish school class, it was the exact opposite. Every time the teacher asked the question, everybody looked at the student being asked. So that's you see that's the other corner of the triangle. That's using questions to put responsibility on you as a receiver. I'm asking these questions because now it's your responsibility to come up with a response. And I'm asking because I want to know what you think. I want to know how you see this, what your thoughts about this. So that's a complete opposite way of using questions. It both has to do with distributing responsibility. Now I'm taking the Chinese teacher taking responsibility by, asking a question, and the Danish teacher is doing the exact opposite. She's, prompting, she's asking you to take responsibility for providing an answer. So these are obviously they are opposites. But the really interesting thing is that there is a third option. And that's what I saw in the Russian school class. Every time the Russian teacher asked a question, everybody looked at the subject matter of her question. Let's say she asked a question about how to spell something. Instead of looking at the teacher or the student being asked, everybody looked at the word they were about to spell. So they looked at their shared purpose, so to speak. And these are findings that are kind of interesting and kind of difficult to share in these times in the world, because nobody wants to hear that maybe Russian culture has something to offer. Everybody just wants to hear that Russia is very, very bad. And I think we can all agree that that president definitely is. But there is, of course, parts of the culture that has very interesting things for us to learn. And my observational studies and studies of questions show that the strategy of the Russian culture, it's not a strategy actually, because it happens subconsciously. It's in the language. I found these differences by looking into grammar, by looking into linguistic differences in how grammar is designed or how it works. So it's not like a conscious strategy. It's simply something we do without noticing. And it's built on these cultural languages. Or language cultures, sorry. So that's very, very interesting for me to see that we have very, very different ways of understanding and using questions. We all use questions to distribute responsibility. You can hear it in the wording, to ask for a response. It has to do with responsibility. It's the same in French, in German, in Italian. There's connection between response and responsibility. There is a connection, but how we do it is fundamentally different. It's either me, you, or what we have in common that we look for some kind of responsibility or some kind of response. And if we only have technology that's based on the second, because English belongs to the second part that has to do with, imposing responsibility on someone else. If we only have technology coming out of that culture, then we will promote a culture that's not diverse, as you said before, that is constantly making it, simply building a culture that is not true to the cultural differences that are at play when human beings engage. And that can be dangerous on a whole another level, right?
Sure. So I'll have to think way deeper about this, but thank you very much. It's very insightful, this experiment, and the insights you got from these experiments. Will it be in your LinkedIn class, these concepts?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is. It actually is. Not by mentioning Russian, Chinese, and Danish, because
but the
that's just
triangle
too
there.
the triangle, all these things. It's really a way of trying to gather all the research I've done
Mhm.
on questions. Of course,
Very
it's
cool.
very short and it's very, but it's also in my books. But it is definitely in the LinkedIn course. Yeah.
Fantastic. We'll definitely look. So to conclude, actually, I would like to benefit from your knowledge in questions to ask you to ask two questions. First, would you like to ask me a question?
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Yeah. Mm, I would, but I would like to take some time to think about what I would like to ask you. Um, I would like to ask you where you think your interest in these things come from.
Mhm. Very, thank you for asking. I think for some reason, and I don't think I have the answer. I'm deeply driven for some reason by seeking the truth, by finding answers. And I remember very young reading encyclopedia with my big brother, with my family. We had tons of books like this and just enjoying trying to ask questions. I remember vividly some adults and one person in particular from my family, but I cannot remember who he was exactly, actually, because I met him maybe once or twice. And I remember he was an adult, always asking questions. And I was maybe 10, 11 years old. I really remember thinking, this is new, but this is fantastic. I think I love it. I see an adult who, and I did not have the feeling that who is this person who don't know anything. I was rather impressed by this capacity to ask questions while knowing things and still like getting deeper. And for some reason, I'm just obsessed. I'm not sure the deep root cause, but it's something deeper in me that brings me to always ask why and try to understand why. And accepting the world is complex and that we often don't have answers, but it's just a very long quest with difficult many angles. And even if you do scientific research, I mean, you have often a very precise, very tiny answer in a very tiny context. So actually, you don't really have the answer. You have some parts in this context that can apply for a subpopulation, very specific at one point in time. So you always have other questions. Will it be the same in this context with these people in the past, in the future? And so I'm not sure I'm answering, but actually, it's just something in me that drives me to always try to seek answers and ask why. And I think this quest is just very enjoyable.
Thank you. That was really nice. And I especially enjoyed your very first part of it where you said what you used the word truth rather than answer. That's a different drive. It has because an answer you can get, but the truth you need to keep going, right? It's not like you're going to reach it and say, "Well, I'm done."
Yeah,
That's
true. I
really
mean, I mentioned this
inspiring.
confirmation bias, which is often what I mention as one of the most pervasive bias that we are all subject to this
Hmm.
bias. And that's even something that when I teach, I often raise this point to say, even myself, I will doubt myself in the sense if I found a piece of information that suits very well my prior belief and I'm very happy with it. For me, it's a red flag. It's a trigger to say, be careful. That might be just your confirmation bias and you might be more kind and accept it easier. So actually, it will just flag, okay, be careful about it. And I'll start trying to find loopholes, weaknesses, limitations, at least with the same intensity as with something that I don't like. And I think that's
Hmm.
something you mentioned as well, or in one of your article. Something very valuable is to have a circle, a group of people around you with different opinions where you disagree with things, but you can discuss about it
Yeah,
in an
yeah,
open and
exactly.
constructive way. And to
Yeah.
escape this echo chamber, this just trying to reinforce our prior belief, I think it's beautiful. And I have the chance to have few people like this where we disagree, we have different view of the world, of politics, different backgrounds, but we can still exchange and reach this
Mhm.
point when you're like, Ah, there is something here that I didn't think about, and now I see and understand your opinion, even if I disagree, and I understand
Mhm.
where it comes from, and I understand why you have this opinion, or even leading to, well, this is making me change my opinion, and I understand that maybe on this I was wrong, or just actually evolve. I think this is incredibly valuable, and I'm not sure again. AI within algorithm in social media is helping with this.
Mhm.
It's often it creates this interaction, but it tends either to reinforce echo chambers or polarize. So I'm not sure. There is some research actually to try to help to do this, to diversify the exposition to different views in algorithm on social media. But yeah.
But I part of the problem, I think, I'm not sure, but I think part of the problem is that no matter how you design the technology, when you use it to enhance or to impact, it doesn't even have to enhance. But if you use it for social or relational purposes, then you put something in between the human beings. It's
Mhm.
just like I think we can all agree it's nice when someone gives you a call. I don't know if people still do that. My father gives me a call sometimes, talking to people, and that's a technology too, right? But it's a technology that's removing the physical distance, but it's giving me his voice.
Mhm.
So I can actually hear if he's a bit sad or if there are things going on, so I can, if he pauses places where he doesn't usually pause, there are a lot of hidden informations that are physically transferred somehow. Um, and I think that's one of the problems that we have with a lot of digital technology. That if you remove all the physical things that we have in common, the feeling of being sad sometime or the feeling of hesitating, or if you remove all that because now it's only in text or it's only in, and you know it's driven by algorithms and all kinds of things, then it's the space between, we're back to the gap, right? The gap between us. um they may say, and I know Mark Zuckerberg did that in the beginning with Facebook, this is built to connect people. But nonetheless, the opposite has happened, right? We see more polarization,
Mhm.
we see more anxiety and depression and all these things. So it's doing the opposite. And it's because of the more we are not meant to be apart, right? We're meant to be together. We
Mhm.
are as human beings. And we are not meant to be together with millions of people at the same time. We are meant to be together with two or three or 10, 50 at the most. Then, oof, now it's getting too much, right? So if you continue to put technology in between us, then it doesn't matter what that technology is. It doesn't matter what it was designed to do or how many problems it tells you it will solve. It, it's going to do the opposite. So building AI chatbots to prevent loneliness will
Mhm.
create more loneliness because I spend my time talking to this bot instead of talking to my son or my dog or what. I know the dog cannot answer, but it's a physical being. I
Mhm.
can give it a hug and I can, remind myself that I am the way I'm supposed to be,
Mhm.
conditioned, limited, weak, all these things. That's okay. So I think it's an important note that it's not a matter of how we design technology and what we design technology to do. It's the fact that when we think we can use technology to connect with each other or to solve fundamentally human based problems, then we're doing the opposite.
Mhm. So I think that's a beautiful way to conclude actually. It's a call in this age of artificial intelligence to remind us that the whole beauty of our humankind cannot be substituted, copied, imitated by this machine, but it's rather a call to still value our human intelligence, our imperfections, our lack of knowledge of everything. Exactly, that's the whole beauty, and to promote these interactions, real life interactions that are really meaningful. Pia, thank you very much for all this conversation. Where we can find you and your content. So on LinkedIn, I guess I'll definitely put the link, and I really encourage everyone to follow you to get more insights on these important questions. And is there any other platform where you are active?
As you probably already figured out, I'm not that into social media. So LinkedIn is the only social media where I'm active. And then my website, pialauritsen.dk. So I think that would be the main ways to reach me.
Perfect. And the book, of course, that I also share, at least to access your knowledge. Perfect. Well, Pia, it was a huge pleasure. Thank you for kicking off the start of the AI Impact podcast. I'm really glad and looking forward to keep discussing and answering and listening to the questions of the audience about this topic. Thank you very much.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you, Quentin.